The sun casts a golden hue over the quiet park, a place where laughter danced freely in the wind and innocence still roamed barefoot in the grass. And for once, billionaire Ion Malik had taken time off his relentlessly calculated life to be with his 6-year-old daughter Amara, whose laughter was the only sound that could soften the steel around his heart. She tugged at his sleeve, asking to play on the swings, and as he nodded with a distracted smile, his phone buzzed again with boardroom demands. But she'd already run ahead, her pigtails bouncing with delight, till suddenly her laughter was replaced by a piercing scream that sliced through the air like a bolt of grief. "Daddy!" she cried, pointing at a scrawny little boy in torn jeans and oversized sandals, who stood silently by the sandbox, clutching a cracked toy truck, his face smeared with dirt, yet his eyes, they were mirrors of Amara's, almond-shaped with a quiet sorrow that didn't belong in a child. Ion's heart seized in his chest, his legs felt rooted in cement, and time seemed to spin backwards, back to the memory he buried deeper than any of his riches could touch. A college love named Zoya. A woman with fire in her spirit and music, in her voice, whom he'd loved fiercely, but left when ambition whispered sweeter promises. Never knowing that she was carrying a life within her, a son he'd never met. A truth kept from him by silence and pride and the cruel passage of years. He had heard rumors once an old friend mentioned Zoya had a child. But he had shut the thought down, not because he didn't care, but because it frightened him more than anything else to think his choices had left an innocent child fatherless. Ion dropped to his knees, hands trembling, and the boy stared back, unsure whether to run or stay, but it was Amara who bridged the distance with childlike certainty, wrapping her tiny arms around the confused boy, declaring once again, "He's my brother." And in that moment, the billionaire wept not for guilt alone, but for all the birthdays he missed, the scraped knees he never kissed, the bedtime stories left unread. His phone slipped from his pocket, buzzing into silence in the grass, forgotten, as if the universe itself demanded he finally listened. Not to board members or profit charts, but to the cry of a soul long denied its place. The nanny rushed forward, trying to pull Amara away, but Ion stopped her with a raised hand and eyes that had already changed. Eyes no longer glazed with stock prices, but drenched in awakening. He walked slowly toward the boy, every step, reckoning every breath a confession. And when he finally knelt and looked into the boy's face, it was like staring into a ghost of who he used to be, fragile, unsure, and hungry, not just for food, but for belonging. "What's your name, son?" he asked hoarsely, voice cracking like old wood, and the boy hesitated, as if afraid of the answer, before whispering Yusuf, and that single word collapsed the last wall in Ion's soul. He didn't ask for DNA, didn't demand proof, because the truth was already screaming through his blood like thunder, and as tears poured down his cheeks, he pulled the boy into his arms, holding both children tightly as if time could be rewound by sheer willpower. In that embrace, his past and future collided, and for the first time, Ion Malik Sherman of Malik Enterprises, the man whose name echoed in global business circles, felt like just a man, father who had wronged and was now desperate to heal. A woman emerged from the shadows, Zoya, older, her once bold eyes tired but still burning with the same quiet strength, and when their gazes locked.
"Ow."
Neither said a word, for too much had been said in absence, and yet everything was understood. She had struggled alone, worked double shifts as a nurse, refused charity, raised Yusuf with dignity, never telling Ion out of bitterness, but also protection, knowing the brutal weight of his world and how it crushed anything too fragile to fight. He remembered how she used to hum lullabies in the rain, how her fingers smelled of jasmine when she touched his face, how she used to dream of a small house by the sea, not a mansion, but a home full of love, and now, seeing her again, not as a memory, but as a mother, a warrior. He felt the shame of every year he spent living large while she carried a storm in silence. "Let me try to fix this," he said softly, not just to her but to fate itself. And though trust wasn't easily restored, Zoya nodded. For she saw that the man who once chased millions now stood in front of her, willing to trade it all for moments he could never buy back. She didn't speak immediately, but tears filled her eyes, not of weakness, but of releases if all the burdens she carried alone had finally been seen. From that day, life didn't magically turn perfect. There were questions, court arrangements, family resistance, and therapy. But Ion changed the core of his universe. He bought a modest house near Zoya's apartment, refused to take full custody, and instead asked for co-parenting. Spent every morning making breakfast with Yusuf and Amara, resigned from half his company boards, and even built a foundation for single mothers named after Zoya, not as charity, but as tribute to the woman who never bent. The media eventually caught on, calling it the redemption of Ion Malik. But he ignored the headlines, for the only spotlight that mattered now was the one cast by his daughter's laughter and his son's growing confidence. He learned to ride bikes with Yusuf, bandage scraped elbows, make late-night pancake dinners, and sit through school plays with prideful tears. He learned to say sorry without ego, to hug without restraint, and to cry without shame. It's a park where it all became their weekend ritual, and every time Amara laughed or Yusuf smiled a little wider, Ion knew that the cost of redemption was steep, but he'd pay it over and over again. Because on that quiet afternoon, when a little girl pointed to a boy and screamed, "Daddy, that's my brother," he didn't just find a son, he found the pieces of himself he never knew were missing, and in choosing them, he finally stepped into the life he was always meant to live. No boardroom could offer what he now had: a table where Yusuf drew crayon stick figures, where Amara braided her doll's hair, where Zoya sometimes joined them with hesitant peace, sipping chai while memories melted into present moments. And years later, when a grown-up Yusuf stood to give a speech at school about the person who changed my life, he didn't name a celebrity or a politician. He simply said, "My dad," because he showed up when it mattered, and he never left. Again, and in the audience, Ion Malik cried with the same open heart as that day in the park, knowing that redemption once seized becomes legacy.